Let you. Okay, so we are recording this presentation. Welcome. This is a part of a speaker series that is hosted by the Woods and Wetlands group of the Illinois Sierra Club. And we're so happy to have you here this evening. Our Sierra Club group covers mostly Lake County and then some portions of Cook and McHenry County. And we've been having these presentations thanks to our wonderful host, Linda Tilton, for several months now. And so tonight, we want to welcome you to another in a series of program meetings sponsored by our club. I'm Rosemary Heileman. Our program meetings feature speakers on topics relating to our environment, stewardship, wildlife and nature, public policy, and anything about outdoor activities like hiking and canoeing, bird watching, you name it. In a minute, we will hear from our featured speakers tonight, Karen Frailey and John Wallace. But first, we have a couple of brief announcements. As we said, we are recording this so that you can watch it in the future. Turn off your camera if you don't wish to appear on the video. We will send out the YouTube address for the program later this week so you can watch it again or encourage your friends to watch it. Before we begin, make sure you are muted, especially if you have a barking dog, a television, or other commotion in the background. And please feel free to ask any questions of our speakers this evening by using the chat room at the bottom of your screen. We will select questions afterward, and they will be directed to the speaker. Now let's move on to our March featured speakers. Karen Frailey is a retired horticulturist who spent much of her career at Southern Illinois University's Plant Biology Greenhouse and Conservatory. After attending SIU Carbondale, she reveled in the geological and biological diversity the far southern region of Illinois offered. Karen has now immersed herself in the campaign to establish the Shawnee National Park and Climate Preserve. She serves on the boards of the Shawnee Chapter Illinois Audubon Society, Shawnee Forest Defense, and Shawnee Park and Climate Alliance. John B. Wallace is a retired public land manager for the city of Carbondale at Cedar Lake and an environmental educator at Southern Illinois University's Touch of Nature Environmental Center. He is a founding member and president of the Shawnee chapter of the Illinois Audubon Society and a founding member and vice president of the Shawnee Park and Climate Alliance. He has been a forest activist working to protect the Shawnee National Forest in Southern Illinois for more than 3 decades. We welcome you, Karen and Bill, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rosemary. Thank you, Woods and Wetlands group of Sierra Club. We're excited to be here, and we will begin our presentation. Karen is going to be the engineer for this program, and she will offer some input. I'm going to be the narrator, though, I believe, for the most part. So Karen, if you would, let's begin our program.
Well, let's see.
So the first thing I want to do, Southern Illinois is our home. And I just want to point out the fact that the Prairie State is a really big state. It's so important to consider perspective when you're talking about natural areas, nature in general. The state of Illinois is 390 miles long, and we're down in the southern tip of Illinois, and you're up in the northern, the northeastern part of the state. At its widest point, Southern Illinois is 210 miles wide. I believe I estimated that at the state line in Wisconsin, Illinois is approximately, looks to be around 140 miles in width. And down in southernmost Illinois, if you draw a line from a horizontal line from Golconda, which is on the Ohio River, over to the Mississippi, that's just a little over 50 miles in diameter. So, we have two of the least populated counties in the state, Pope County and the county to Hardin County to the north. It's merely Pope County has 3,789 people in it as of the most recent census. So and yet the county is over 40 miles from north to south. So it's a pretty sparsely populated area. We're down there. If we could go to the next slide, Karen. The Shawnee has a really unique history. Back in the 1930s, Southern Illinois a lot of the area was very degraded and highly eroded. The land was logged, cleared, farmed, burned repeatedly, and much of the land cover was eliminated, and there was many of the residents left due to the Great Depression. And Karen, if you go to the next slide, and went to the cities. They abandoned their farms, these eroded, non-productive farms, and they went to the cities to try to find work and try to be able to feed themselves. Okay. More sites of eroded land in southern Illinois. But while much of the land was very degraded, there was also there were a number of areas that were recognized for their scenic beauty, their geologic interest, and their value for tourism. And a gentleman by the name of Colonel L.O. Trigg promoted was the first man to really take on developing a national forest in southern Illinois. And he offered tours throughout the regions to places like Garden of the Gods and Burden Falls, the highest waterfall in the state of Illinois. And many of the different features from Stoneface we have 3 natural bridges in the Shawnee, numerous waterfalls, and lots of scenic bluffs. Next slide. And so he promoted this concept of creating Illinois' first national park. And there was legislation first entered in 1933 to start this process, but it wasn't until 1939 when Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed the law to create the Shawnee National Forest. And the Shawnee spans from the Ohio River to the Mississippi River, and that began a process that began a great process of not only doing something that helped Southern Illinoisans and the land, but also it created jobs here in Southern Illinois. And the Civilian Conservation Corps began to get active. They planted many trees, built roads, trails, constructed fire towers, and really began to curtail the fires that were almost annually set back in the early 1900s by the people to kind of keep the land clear and open. Next slide. So to put some things into perspective, we have 11 counties that make up the Shawnee region. And again, it's also termed southernmost Illinois. And some of these are some of the poorest counties in the state. And again, you can see Golconda, if you kind of draw a line over toward Jonesboro, that's that area that's about 50 miles across, from one river to the other. Next slide. The Shawnee is, to put it in perspective, and again, I think perspective is really something that is hard for people to comprehend. We only can experience what we've, we can only look at new experiences from the past experiences that we have. So these 11 counties, right now, we currently have 294,000 acres of land that is now Shawnee National Forest land that belongs to you and I and every American. And again, it spans those 11 counties. And if you look at this map closely, it is the green portions that we have larger concentrations on the western side of the forest, and some larger concentrations more on the eastern side of the forest as well. Next slide. But it is interspersed with quite a bit of private land and whatnot. So currently, the Shawnee National Forest is managed by the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Forest Service, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Forest Service does industrial logging. It is productivity and uses of multiple uses is a dominant factor for the U.S. Department of Agriculture Forest Service, and they're currently have numerous different logging projects going on throughout the Shawnee National Forest. Next slide. This is near Lake Kincaid. This is a logging project in Gallatin County by the Garden of the Gods National Recreation Area. The Shawnee is nestled in between the two rivers, the great rivers, Ohio and Mississippi, and the confluence of the two take place right at Cairo. And what's so fascinating about this area, that over 50% of every raindrop that falls in the continental United States or in the lower 48 that becomes surface water ends up passing the confluence of the Ohio and the Mississippi. These are such massive drainages, and it's a fascinating area. Next. It's also located on the Mississippi Flyway for waterfowl. It's a very popular place for ducks and geese that come in, that follow the Mississippi River floodplains, basically, and a very important area for birds and bird lovers like myself, birders. Next. Songbirds are also drawn to the Shawnee. It is known to have quite a bit of neotropical migratory songbirds, such as this prothonotary warbler. Bird watchers are a significant economic driver for regions. The problem is we've not done that good of a job, as a birder myself, we've not done that good of a job of actually tallying up effectively all of the how important birding is to our local economy. Next. Besides being on these bordered by these incredible important drainages, we also have some very unique areas, such as the Bellsmith Springs National Natural Landmark. Well, the National Natural Landmark System is a really important component. It is actually administered by the National Park Service, even though this is currently National Forest land. And it's areas that are determined to be national natural landmarks are determined by their unique geologic and biological features. And on a national level, not on a state level or on a regional level, but on a national level. And we have 4 of them on the Shawnee National Forest. One is LaRue Pine Hills National Natural Landmark. We just saw a slide of Little Grand Canyon National Natural Landmark, Bellsmith Springs, and the 4th is Lusk Creek Canyon. LaRue Pine Hills is also a research natural area, which is the result of the Illinois Natural Areas Inventory, which took place in the 1970s, which biologists and geologists scoured the state for a high quality, what was left in this, the prairie state, of high quality natural areas. And back when the original natural areas inventory was conducted, there was less than 0.07% of Illinois land that was considered quality natural habitat. And if you think about that, that's shocking. That's 0.07%. And it's important to keep that perspective in mind. In this Illinois, the prairie state, we have actually very little prairie left because Illinois became the breadbasket for the nation because of the soils and drainages and the productivity of our what were prairies in the rest of Illinois. And we have in southern Illinois all these unique, if you could go back a slide, Karen. You're going forward, excuse me. So what I wanted to point out that we have natural divisions in southern Illinois that are really in that small area. We have unique natural divisions. One is the Ozarks actually extend over from Missouri and Arkansas into the western part of Illinois. And so we have limestone bluffs like are found at LaRue Pine Hills. LaRue Pine Hills is 4.5 square miles in size. And back in the 1970s, it was recognized by Dr. Robert Molenbrock, the internationally famous botanist, to actually have more botanical diversity than the entire Great Smoky Mountains. And that's pretty amazing when you think about, I believe 4.5 square miles is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 2,800 acres. And the Great Smoky Mountains is over 500,000 acres in size. And what makes LaRue Pine Hills so unique is these limestone bluffs, which are characteristics of the Ozarks, the Ozark Plateau, and this in the uplands that goes straight down to the floodplain of the Mississippi River, which is another natural division, the Mississippi River floodplain. And springs feed this. There is a swamp, LaRue Swamp, at the base of these bluffs. So we have very hot and dry xeric conditions at LaRue Pine Hills. One of the 2 places where shortleaf pine, Pinus echinata, are found to exist naturally in southern Illinois, just in their natural community. People often, when they go to LaRue Pine Hills, want to see forests of pines. Well, our forests are not dominated by pines. There are some shortleaf pine, but they're predominantly deciduous forests along the in the Ozarks. There's just like I said, two places, and the other place is just a little farther north, out just north of the Shawnee National Forest, where these pines occur naturally. But then down in the floodplains, and springs issue forth from the limestone bluffs and feed the swamp. And it's a very unique type of wetland, what's called a shrub scrub wetland. And that change in such diversity of the habitats, the two different natural divisions, and our central location really gives us a lot of biological diversity in this one area. This is the area where the famed Snake Road, which is actually the first and only road in the United States that is closed for snake migrations semi-annually, and hence the name Snake Road. And it's closed for 2 months in the spring and 2 months in the fall. Usually, they have been known to extend the closure if migration continues on longer than the typical 2 months. So what happens is many of the reptiles, and it's not just snakes, it's also amphibians that spend the winters in the warm limestone, at the base of the warm limestone bluffs, actually make their way out of the bluffs and down to the swamp to reproduce and spend the growing season, and then in the fall they make their way back into their hibernacula. So it's a very unique area. In fact, I'm trying to think of what was the president of the St. Louis Zoo, Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, actually used to Martin. Help me out here, Karen.
Perkins.
Marlin Perkins, not Martin Perkins. Thank you. Used to come to Snake Road and collect snakes to add to the collection of snakes at the St. Louis Zoo. But it is a unique place. The Snake Road closed early this year because we've had an unusually warm late winter. It actually closed, I believe it was either February 28th or 29th. Now it'll be interesting to see if it stays closed for longer than just a usual 60 days. But herpetologists do monitor it, and especially at these times of years, the amphibians and reptiles that migrate across the road are ectotherms, which means they get their warmth and are able to move more freely from their environment. And when it starts cooling down, a lot of times they will spend more time on a place like a road where there's more sunlight than in the forest or in the swamp to warm up, and they'll lay out and hence make them easily killed. So that's why it's actually it's closed for this migration. And it actually may be the only road in the world that I've not heard of any others that are closed for snake migration semi-annually. And besides the Ozarks, we also have what's called the Shawnee Hills, which dominates the majority of the Shawnee National Forest. So the Ozark Plateau is dominated by limestone and chert. The Shawnee Hills is dominated by sandstone. And that's where you see formations like the Garden of the Gods, the different, we have 3 different natural bridges made out of lime, that were formed out of limestone through differential erosion, and many bluffs and overlooks. And just to the north, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of Carbondale to Marion to Harrisburg, a line changes that creates right on the border of the Shawnee National Forest, that becomes the Southern Till Plain. And the Southern Till Plain is a more typical prairie type of habitat, or it was the area that was scoured by the several glacial periods that took place. Illinois and Wisconsin glaciers that came down and scoured Illinois and made these great soils for the agriculture that we're now known for. Now, to the south of so then you have the Ozarks and the Shawnee Hills, and to the south of those is the coastal plain, which is the area that is known for the bald cypress and tupelo swamps. And it is actually the ancient extension of the Gulf of Mexico, used to stretch up into southern Illinois, and that is within the Shawnee National Forest. So these different natural divisions really make our Shawnee National Forest unique. But we've got we certainly have some issues right now that take place with the national forests, and that is the industrial uses of the land. And here's some more photographs. This is actually a photograph of from a logging site in Pope County. I believe that was taken in October of 2021, and near the old past town of Rosebud. It's I want to bring up and have discussions about why we think this is not a good use of our public land. Next slide. So forest, as we are now facing this global climate, and I call it a disaster rather than a crisis, because it is I shouldn't call it, I should call it a crisis rather than just a problem. The climate change is upon us, and we see it all around us. Several years ago, wildfires out west were ravaging landscapes. Drought is devastating. Many areas, storms. We have been having tornadoes in December and February in southern Illinois, western Kentucky. It's our weather patterns are changing significantly, and we have to change our ways to hopefully arrest some of this these effects of climate change, because people are suffering from climate change. Economies are being shattered from these weather patterns and these climate change driven wildfires. But trees and forest really restore our atmosphere. So the problem with climate change is carbon dioxide is creating the greenhouse effect in our atmosphere, and it's being produced by internal combustion engines primarily. Carbon dioxide is the biggest greenhouse gas that we have, the most prolific one. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change from the United Nations issued a report back in 2018, in October 2018, that said we have till 2030 to really drastically reduce the amount of carbon that we're emitting into the atmosphere. And I say we, it is international in scope. It's not just an American problem, it is an international problem. But we also, besides changing our ways, getting better energy generation from renewable energies such as wind and solar, and being more conservation minded, just using less internal combustion motors and And we also, and just consuming less, we also need to pull the carbon that's in the atmosphere out. We have too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere already. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change noted that if our carbon dioxide, the current amount that is in the atmosphere remains at current levels, we're going to have disasters beyond what we've had. That panel, that intergovernmental panel, which is comprised of about 200 scientists worldwide, actually stated that, and they've released 7 reports, actually 6 more since the 2018 report that said we have to stop. We've got to change this drastically. And that and the last one that came out in February of 2023 was really pointed out the fact that the disasters, the natural disasters that are driven by climate change, are getting worse and are worse than what they thought it would be. And so if we stop burning fossil fuel today, we still have too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We have to do what's called sequestration. And there's all kinds of technology that is being developed trying to sequester carbon from burning fossil fuel, but it is non-effective at this point. It is we don't really have enough time to test all these out and try to figure out what technology is best. But we do have a component that really is effective at pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and it is natural ecosystems. And oceans are incredible at sequestering carbon. But the problem is they store it. They store it in the oceans, and that can create problems and cause acidification of our oceans. But we have natural areas on land, and one of the best ones, the best one we have available, is forest ecosystems, especially mature forest ecosystems, because through photosynthesis are able to pull that carbon out of the atmosphere. And it's been determined that the land sequestration ability is about 30% can pull out about 30% of our carbon emissions. So if we can lower our carbon emissions and maintain or even increase our sequestrations from our natural ecosystems, we're going to be able to get out of this mess. But we have to do it, and we have to do it fast. Unfortunately, since 2018, it's just gotten worse. And the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is increasing instead of decreasing. But we're starting to develop infrastructures. We're starting to rely less on fossil fuels for generating energy. Where alternative modes of transportation are getting developed. We have a possibility of correcting this. And one of the best ways of all those natural ecosystems is actually forests to pull the carbon from the atmosphere. And research has just recently shown that eastern deciduous forests, now we don't have as many eastern deciduous forests as we have western coniferous forest, but they're actually showing that the eastern forests are doing much better in the face of climate change. So what they found since 1999, research that's been done from 1999 to 2020 has determined that the carbon the carbon in the atmosphere is caused droughts and increased extreme heat in the west, and it hasn't done that in the east. In fact, we're getting more moisture in the east. So our forests are being more productive, and the more productive they are, the more they grow, the more they sequester carbon. So it's really hopeful, but we have to keep these forests standing. Next slide. So what we're proposing is the Shawnee National Park and Climate Preserve, which we believe is Illinois' best idea. And we're proposing taking the public land in the Shawnee National Forest, which is already in federal hands, so we don't have to acquire more property, which happens with most national parks. It will just be a matter of shifting the that land from the Department of Agriculture over to the Department of Interior to be Illinois' first national park. And then it would be the nation's first climate preserve. Now, let me explain a little bit about national preserves. And we have at this point in the U.S., we have 63 national parks, and we have 21 national preserves. And national preserves are similar to national parks with unique features in them, similar to what we have in the Shawnee and or in other places. But it allows for more flexibility. Most national parks, for instance, don't allow for hunting. We're not at all about to restrict hunting or other recreational uses on the Shawnee. We support recreational use much more than we support commercial exploitation, like logging and mining and oil and gas drilling, that sort of thing, which also produce a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Next slide. And how does this happen? There's Congress actually decides. Congress makes a decision whether or not an area should be considered a national park. And the National Park Service manages other areas than just national parks. They manage national historic sites. They manage national cemeteries, national battlefields, seashores, and preserves. And again, most national preserves are associated with a national park. I think of one that's very common that Karen and I like to go to the Everglades sometimes in the winter because the birding is so good and it's such a pleasant area. And there's a 800,000 acre preserve, Big Cypress Preserve, that is protecting the watershed for the Everglades. The Everglades actually is part of a flowing water ecosystem that comes from Lake Okeechobee up in a little more central to the Florida Peninsula, and that protects that. And there's also that was developed in 1974. Along with that was the first national preserve, along with the Big Thicket in South Texas. And every national preserve has its own purpose. But some national preserves have resource extraction. Most typical is oil and gas development. But so this isn't going to be that big of a change. What we're proposing is a new national preserve with a name that is unique, a climate preserve, but not having resource extraction at it, and that way we can continue to recreation users can continue to use much of the Shawnee as they always have. The vast majority of the Shawnee would be a national preserve. The really unique areas, generally speaking, the currently national recreation areas would be the national park portion. We've got some unique research natural areas. Real good model is the New River Gorge National Park and Preserve. Karen and I visited the New River Gorge in the summer of 2021, and it really is very similar to Southern Illinois, to the Shawnee. It was a national scenic river beforehand, but once it became a national park and preserve, it was 10% of the the area was developed to be the national park portion, and 90% was the preserve. So that basically hunting, dispersed camping, which is camping that doesn't, the primitive camping that doesn't have any facilities. It's not, you can camp in lots of parts of the Shawnee without using a designated campsite. You can just go off into the forest and set up a tent in places. Not every place, but again, not every place can you hunt on the Shawnee National Forest. You can't hunt in the recreation areas. Rock climbing is very popular in the New River Gorge area. We don't have the big river for whitewater rafting, but we do have some interesting streams, that are very unique in our region. And it's also what used to be a very coal mine dependent area, just like Southern Illinois. And it's really helped the economy of the area. And it's a vibrant area that is well managed. And what's so important about it is the Park Service has a mandate to manage recreation well that protects the natural environment. Next slide. The Forest Service doesn't have that, by the way. They're not mandated to consider recreation like the Park Service. So this will help this very economically depressed area. Of our 11 counties, I think they average somewhere in the neighborhood of 12.9% of being below the poverty line in the state of Illinois, which is the lowest in the state. And the Park Service has recently just produced a publication that shows how much visitors to national parks spend. And in Illinois does have a few national park sites. They're not National Park Service sites. We have the Pullman National Historical Park up in Chicago. There is the Lincoln Memorial in Springfield, and just recently the New Liberty was designated as a national historic park over
New
in
Philadelphia.
I'm sorry, thank you, New Philadelphia, over in western Illinois. But that's going to. I'm not sure that the Park Service has acquired even any of the land and the real estate that they need to yet. But it has happened. But those are still not national parks. So what I wanted to do is point out some of these figures on some of our neighboring states. We don't really think about Indiana and Kentucky as being places with a lot of national parks, but they actually, each one does have a national park. And look at the difference in spending in those two states, because Indiana has Indiana Dunes. It was created as it used to be a state park. It became a national park in 2018, 2019, I believe. And look at the difference in spending in Indiana and Kentucky alone. Now, Missouri has a national park, but it's the Gateway Arch. Again, it used to be a memorial, and it was upgraded to a national park. But they also have several different other national park designations. One being the Ozark National Scenic Riverways. But that's pretty drastic when you consider we only get $10 million in spending from visitors to Illinois compared to 100,000 plus. All right, next slide. And also the same is affected by jobs. And jobs are very important. Our economy is very important. Southern Illinois has been suffering greatly. Our population has dropped significantly since the 1990s. And, you know, if the Forest Service gets its way, there will likely be in the future more jobs in resource extraction. But the problem with resource extraction is they're not consistent jobs. And it's not economically consistent because they vary on and off as the resources become available. But again, if you could go back to that one, Karen, the Park Service mission, and that's just what is so important, I think. And when people consider whether or not this is a viable alternative, is that the Park Service mission is to preserve unimpaired natural and cultural resources of the park system for the enjoyment, education, and inspiration of this and future generations. And the Park Service are masters at managing recreation. I know people have expressed concern that we don't want to bring more tourists to Southern Illinois, more recreation. Well, the fact is, more of it's coming. It has been coming. Recreation is on the increase. And the Forest Service has no mandate for recreation. While they do some recreation, the Forest Service has basically reduced their recreation sites. Campgrounds have been closed over the last 25 years. Several different campgrounds. Some of the recreation areas have been really tiered down. The Park Service, that's an important part of what they do. And the Forest Service spends money selling our timber, and they lose money selling timber. And the Park Service doesn't do that. You know, they have a mandate. The Forest Service develops a timber targets, and they're out to reach all those timber targets because they get more money from Congress when they cut more of our trees. And when you look at climate change and recreation, it's really best to keep our forest intact rather than cut them up into pieces. Next slide. So besides having this really unique area on a biological scale, we have a great deal of history in Southern Illinois that really needs to be, we have stories that need telling. And again, there is anyone who has visited a national park in the recent future, that's what they do. The National Park Service is incredible storytellers, and there's so much rich history. For instance, Miller Grove is a pre-Civil War, pre-African American community. It's in Polk County, not far from where Karen and I live, that was established in the 1840s. And not far from there is a site. It's called Sand Cave, this sandstone overhang that was a very well hidden area that was an underground railroad site. And just adjacent to that is a natural area called Crow Knob that the runaway slaves were signaled. They would put signal fires on Crow Knob to let the escaped slaves know that it was safe to come to Southern Illinois and to the area and have a rest in Sand Cave before they continue their flight to freedom. There's also these historic salt springs in Gallatin and just near the Saline County line that actually had slavery. In fact, Illinois was considered a free state, but enslaved people were used to process salt from these salt springs. And interestingly, it's even written into our original, the state's original constitution, that slavery would be permitted just south of the town of the name Equality in southern Illinois. The ironic name for that. We also have an incredible Native American history across southern Illinois on sandstone bluffs, outcroppings. There are these stone forts that are basically made of smaller pieces of sandstone piled up. They were believed to be about 6 foot high originally. Many of them have been knocked down and have been altered, but there are actually 11 of them, and it's a unique component in Illinois. Is these stone forts? They're usually found on sandstone bluffs that have kind of a close, either three-sided or close to three sides, that were not approachable. And so the indigenous people at the time, the woodland people, built these stone walls as what they believed were at the time were fortresses. And it's just fascinating. And numerous ones of those stone forts are found on the Shawnee National Forest, such as the one that exists at Millstone Bluff. There's one at War Bluff on the Shawnee, and there's a couple others that are escaping my mind right now. But let's move on. Another dark part of our history is the Trail of Tears, which was the forced relocation of the Cherokee people from their native homelands in what is now the Great Smoky Mountains National Park area of northern Georgia, Tennessee, and North Carolina, eastern Tennessee, to Oklahoma. And that took place in the winter. And there were numerous different routes that were taken, but the land route on foot across southern Illinois was completely the Cherokee. There were a number of other people that were moved, native people that were moved out of the east to Oklahoma, but from what I understand, it was the Cherokee that came across on southern Illinois, and they crossed over at Golconda, and then made their way west and just west of Jonesboro, crossed over into Missouri. The problem was, in that winter, they actually had a really severe winter, and they couldn't cross the rivers because of the ice flows, and so many of them, they were forced to stay in southern Illinois, and many died. As many as 1,000 were believed to have died in southern Illinois. So, speaking of history, the Civilian Conservation Corps is a wonderful bit of history that's found in the Shawnee, such as at Bellsmith Springs. If you've ever been there, that incredible stairway, that staircase, when you think how long it has lasted, it's pretty impressive and beautiful, as well as the picnic shelters at Lake Glendale, the sandstone with their great fireplaces. Besides just planting trees, they did some great things. So southern Illinois is primed for a change. We're in dire straits. Both ecologically is things are getting better on the landscape, but because of our situation with the climate, it's really disturbing that we're still cutting our public forest, and the question is whether that serves the most people. And that is that photo was a woman at Garden of the Gods recreation area overlooking Garden of the Gods wilderness. We also have in the Shawnee almost 30,000 acres. It's 29,000 in some acres of wilderness in 7 different locations on the Shawnee. It's pretty amazing when you think about this small area, how much public land we have, even though it is interspersed with private land. So I did mention the national preserves and the characteristics being associated with national parks. And here are some examples such as Denali, Gates of the Arctic, and Glacier Bay, and of course the New River Gorge and National Preserve. Again, in the preserves, recreation is also preserved. The many recreation aspects. There is beliefs that equestrian horseback riding will be curtailed and hunting will be curtailed and even mountain biking, and that's not the case. In fact, horseback riding and mountain biking are rock climbing are typical uses in many national parks. But again, what I want to point out is the Park Service knows how to manage to protect the resources that the Forest Service just doesn't have the expertise to do it like the Park Service. Another picture of Garden of the Gods, and that's Camel Rock there, which is probably one of the most famous photographs of a natural landscape in Illinois, that Camel Rock on the left side of the screen. Again, Bellsmith Springs, National Natural Landmark, and also it is a natural area, research natural area. We have 90 of those such natural areas across the Shawnee National Forest, and again, more recreation, sound recreation uses that add to our quality of life. And we encourage folks up north to come down to the Shawnee and to see what we have. This is we have places that are very similar to the Ozarks. We have places that are very similar on the eastern side of the Shawnee that are more similar to the Appalachians. And this is another photo of Bellsmith Springs. And so, in closing, I believe I thought we had the quote from Teddy Roosevelt, but I don't believe we do have it in the slide presentation. But the President Roosevelt, who probably designated more national lands for recreation, protection and recreation and conservation than any other president, made a statement. I'm paraphrasing that there's no better thing that we can do as a people than to leave a land that is better than we found it for the people that come after us, and that's why we have formed the Shawnee Park and Climate Alliance, and why we're proposing the Shawnee National Park and Climate Preserve. We believe it's Illinois' best idea. So,
wow. Well, thank you so much, John and Karen. You've given us so much to think about, but I think there are some questions, and I'm going to turn it over to Steve, if you would handle the questions, and then we'll just have a few closing comments.
All right, the first question is from Linda. If the climate, hang on a minute, slide it up, can't read the top of the screen. If the Shawnee does become a national park and climate refuge, would the trees be protected?
Well, the Park Service does cut trees. They would have a better chance of protection because they don't have a mandate to log commercially like the Forest Service. Again, every year, the Forest Service presents to Congress their timber targets. And Congress says, okay, we're going to give you money to reach these timber targets. And the agency is notorious for losing money on selling our timber. And the reason that is primarily is the Forest Service builds roads to do this. Most of our forests that are logged are in areas without roads, so they have to build the roads to sell the timber, and it ends up costing the taxpayer and costing the agency. The Park Service does not do that. So, to be honest, they'll cut some trees, but they're not going to, have cut as many as the Forest Service. So yes, they would be protected.
The other part of her question was that would still be harvested and partially. The other portion of the question, there's actually two more. Would wildlife be protected? If it's a national park?
Yes, again, I draw your attention to the mission of the Park Service, which is to preserve the natural components of their mandate, and that is wildlife. So yes, the Park Service is preservation is number one for this and future generations. Everything else, recreation included, has recreation and education has a lower priority than preservation. And so that's what's so important. So yes, in my opinion, it would be much better. It would be a much better fix for the Shawnee.
Okay, and there's still two more parts to that question. What about hunting?
Hunting would continue to be permitted.
It'd be no different than it is now.
What's that?
No different than it is now.
I can't promise that there would never be a difference. Just because, and any more than I could promise that there'll never be a difference with the Forest Service.
Yeah.
And they will, land managing agencies make shifts, a little bit either way. They do that, deciding that, this isn't a good mix, because there's more recreation here. We don't primarily, that is a big component. You don't want to have hunters where there's also hikers and a lot of recreational users in the same region. But what we're proposing is the places that are used most extensively for hunting now would be part of the preserve for that reason, because national preserves allow for hunting. National parks generally don't. That it doesn't go to say that national parks don't sometimes, because they realize there's a need to control some game species, so they don't damage the to make sure that the resources are preserved for this and future generations. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And then the final portion of the question is, would rangers still carry out their wonderful programs?
Absolutely. And again, I invite people, ever since we've taken this on, and we started with this campaign, I believe it was in October of 2021, we've been visiting national park sites. And, it's amazing. I invite people that if you come to the Shawnee, and I encourage people to come to the Shawnee National Forest, and the Forest Service is, they can't help it. A lot of what they do, they're Congress has already determined this is what your role is, but and they've done some great things. Without the Forest Service, we wouldn't have the forests that we have now. However, it's time for change, and these just in the same way that it was time for change in the 1930s. It's like it was a lot of people in Southern Illinois resisted that change in the 1930s, but and we're starting to get some resistance now. But the park rangers are National Park Service rangers are so good at telling different stories and reaching out. We don't even have in the Shawnee, we don't even have a visitor center. You know, it's 294,000 acres. The New River Gorge National Park and Preserve is 70,000 acres in size, and they have 3 different visitor centers. You know, it's hard sometimes to even find. You know, we used to have 5 different offices throughout the Shawnee back in the 1980s that were open to the public, but through budget cuts and whatnot, now there's basically, you're lucky to find 2 that you can enter, and they're just better at telling the story and better at protecting the land.
Okay. Next question is, what would happen? I think you partially covered this, to the wilderness areas if it became a national park and climate refuge?
They would still be wilderness areas.
Okay.
It would not change that the National Park Service manages wilderness areas
All right.
as well.
Where do the harvested trees go and who buys them?
Interestingly enough, back in the early 1990s, you all might remember the timber wars of the 1990s, where often the spotted owl, the out west at least, the problems, the conflict was portrayed as spotted owls versus loggers. One of the things that the environmentalists were trying to do was implement a way of tracking the timber that is logged on national forests, and it's relatively easy to do. Logs would be tagged. If you're cutting timber from national forest land, then you had to treat it a certain way. That way, that timber could be tracked where it ends up, because we export timber in this country, and the timber industry is very powerful in Congress and has a lot of friendly lawmakers from out west actually convinced the Congress to not allow that, not allow us to have any information about where they go. And there are some logging companies in Southern Illinois. There's none that rely on the Shawnee for timber at this point. But we do also have more recently, most of the logging that has been taking place is done from loggers outside the area, and outside the state even. The last couple timber sales that were the larger ones were dominated by loggers from Kentucky, logging companies.
Okay. Bill Herman says, so you're calling for a mix of national park and national preservation area. I think that would be a good idea. And I'm going to skip one and put Rosemary's up. She says, I would like to see that slide showing what can we do. Can you put that up while I go through the rest of these questions?
It's up right now, Steve.
Oh, it is. Okay. My screen of the questions is blind. Okay. Yep. I see it. All right, cool. Thanks to the great presentation. We now have a federal area, Hackamak in the far north of the state, and having one of the extreme south would be great.
And I have to say that Glenn Moss is president of our local Audubon group here in Lake County. And I kind of thought you guys would be on the same page. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you for coming.
I'm proud to say that I serve on the Illinois Audubon Society's board. One of our committees on one of the Illinois Audubon Society board committees, the Land Protection and Stewardship Committee, and we're a partner of the recent Hackamak land acquisition. I believe 975 acres were just recently purchased as a result of a number of different partners that took place that will eventually become part of the National Wildlife Refuge.
Okay. someone asked the question, and also there was someone else agreed, it's hard to find trail maps for the entire forest, but Rhonda says the trail maps are online.
If somebody could send those to me, I will put them on the page when I send out the recording of the program. If you could send me the sites, I will include that when I say thank you for coming and here's the video.
Okay. Current volunteer at Pullman National Historical Park in Chicago. The park ranger programs here are great with far minimal land in comparison to Shawnee. The potential ranger programming in a more vast place like Shawnee could be phenomenal. Somebody agrees. Hunting helps this type of effort. What types of snake utilize the crossing mentioned in the talk? I think you mentioned some of them, but
there are many snakes. And Karen, you are muted if you're wanting to say something about Pullman.
Oh, I just had to say, we visited Pullman last summer and were blown away. I'm jumping back to the last comment. It was
Okay.
amazing and so inspiring. And what was so cool is how all the different agencies work together to, whether the city of Chicago and DNR and the local community and the National Park Service. Our hats are off to you guys. It was so inspirational to visit and to see how the community is rejuvenating and new businesses coming in. But for the snakes, I've taken John and I have taken several workshops that focused on the amphibians and reptiles of Southern Illinois, 2 and 3 day workshops. And when we visit the LaRue Pine Hills and the Snake Road, it's unbelievable. Some days you don't see anything, other days you see a few things, some days you see lots of things, and whether they be one of our 3 venomous snakes, the copperhead, the cottonmouth, or the timber rattler, or we see the one or two of the different kinds of the green snakes, or there's some really rare and endangered mud snakes. And is it red-bellied mud snake? I think, John, it's, as John said earlier, years ago, I picked up a field guide to amphibians and reptiles, to snakes. And the foreword was written by Marlon Perkins. It was an old book. And he was the director at the St. Louis Zoo at the time. And he wrote about, back then they collected snakes in Southern Illinois, south of Murfreesboro, in the Little Grand Canyon area, which we mentioned earlier, and in the Pine Hills. And he said it was the most diverse and the most numbers that he had seen anywhere he'd ever been.
well, that's cool.
Yeah, it is.
If you go to the bottom of your screen, and along the bottom there's a little icon that says chat, you can see these questions, because someone has Rhonda posted a URL for maps. It looks like the Shawnee map. So it's
I'll put it on the
okay.
thing when I send it out.
We'll get it put on there.
I got it. Thank you,
Someone
Rhonda.
says cottonmouth is one of the species.
Yes.
If I recall correctly, I don't understand. The Illinois chapter was previously not supportive of having the NPS develop the Shawnee into a national park. What was the opposition?
So,
That's from Linda Horn.
so the Illinois chapter is officially has a neutral stance regarding the initiative to create the Shawnee National Park and Climate Preserve.
Are you talking about the Illinois chapter of Audubon or the Illinois chapter?
I don't know.
Sierra?
I'm just reading the question as it says.
Illinois
chapter
what?
Sierra Club.
Sierra Club.
I'm involved with the Illinois Audubon Society, and a chapter of the Illinois Audubon Society down here, which is actually separate from national. But Sierra Club, the chapters for National Sierra Club are statewide. So Illinois has a chapter, Indiana has a chapter, and so on. They have a policy that they have that they have created. And I assume you can get that by requesting it. There's actually a Shawnee National Forest committee for the chapter of Sierra Club, the Illinois chapter. I've read the document, and frankly, there's incorrect and unsubstantiated. I look forward to doing more research. I finally, after asking for the bibliography for months, I finally got a copy of the bibliography, and I do want to research it. But I find it disappointing, but also not surprising. There's a recent publication. I can't remember the name of the publication that published an article about an editorial about some people hate the Park Service until they love them, and it's changes. We're proposing a change, and people resist change. It's hard. Even myself, especially the older I get, it's more difficult to change. And I'm hoping that I will actually have a sit down face to face with the Shawnee National Forest Committee of the Illinois Chapter Sierra Club to actually discuss their policy and give me an opportunity to respond and actually have a dialogue with the chapter, because I'm positive I've yet to find a good a good argument against creating Illinois' first national park, the Shawnee National Park Climate Preserve.
We're just going to say at this point, we're neutral. At this point, we're neutral. And that's, I don't think the book is closed, but I think we are coming to the end of our program, since we seem to keep talking and talking. But John and Karen, thank you so much for your wonderful program and your wonderful insights into this wonderful environment that we have down in our wonderful state at the bottom there along the Ohio and Mississippi River. For those of us who are, anybody still awake and online, we're looking forward to more information-packed programs this spring, as well as a few adventures in education. On Sunday, April 28th, our next speaker series, we are delighted to welcome Nate Siskill, an education program coordinator from the McHenry County Conservation District. Nate, who has great credentials also, will share information about a big natural event this year, the emergence of the 17-year cicada, as well as the 13-year in some areas. They'll be coming out at the same time. Won't happen again for another 221 years. So we have to enjoy it this year. Join us to hear the chorus of the cicadas, the ultimate celebration. You can register for this Zoom program at the Woodsman Wetlands website. Again, it's open to all, not just Sierra Club members. Anyone who's interested is welcome. We'll be delighted to see you there. Another point I wanted to share, did you ever wonder where the water that flows away from your home and businesses go? Yep, down the drain. But then what? We are inviting our members to register for a tour of the North Shore Water Reclamation District plant and labs in Gurnee. Our water station pumping outing was phenomenal, and we want to finish up the theme with the plant up in Gurnee. Check our website for dates and times and to register. That is in progress. And I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. And again, thank Karen and John for sharing about the Shawnee. You will all be receiving an email from me later this week with the YouTube address for this tape program. And also I'll include that website. Thank you so much and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, everybody.